Hey everyone. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way YouTube will keep showing you more stories just like this one. Alright, let's begin. I was about ready to quit the day I found the shop. My name is Lucas Hale. I am a violinist. For years I played on street corners and in small bars across New England. I made just enough to survive when the weather helped, and the crowds were generous. That fall I was living in Ashburn, Massachusetts, in a studio above a laundromat. My right wrist hurts every morning. My landlord warned me about another rent increase. I told myself I would finish out the month, sell the violin, and take a warehouse job. On a gray Wednesday, I walked a block I did not know well. The main street curved behind the courthouse into a short row of old storefronts. Between a locksmith and a barbershop sat a narrow door with painted glass. The sign read, Violetti & Sons, Musical Instruments, Restoration, established in 1911. I had never noticed it. A bell rang when I opened the door. Inside smelled like wood and varnish. Violin cases lined the shelves. A glass counter held bows. Behind it stood a thin man in a dark vest and a gray tie. His hair was white and tidy. "Looking for anything in particular?" he asked. "My violin is dying," I said. "I play on the street. I need something that can handle that." "Play something," he said. I took out my instrument and played a minute of Bach. The man listened without a word. "You are fighting the wood," he said. "I can offer you something better. It is not in the window." He brought out a wooden case, the color of tea. Inside was a red-brown violin with a thin top and worn edges. The tailpiece had a small inlaid flower. "This is not for sale in the usual way," he said. "But you are someone who works. Try it." It was light. The neck sat right in my hand. I drew one open A. The sound stood in the room in a clean line. I played the same Bach passage and felt grated up without warning. I did not have to force the tone. "How much?" I asked. "No money," he said. "There is a condition. If you take it, you must play in public at least once every calendar week, and you must not play to an empty room. There must be at least one listener. If you fail, bring it back." I agreed. He wrote my name and the date in a small ledger and had me sign. He told me to keep my own bow. He closed the old case around the violin and handed it to me. On Friday, I set up in my usual square near the coffee shop. When I drew the first notes, heads turned. I made more in an hour than on most days. A barista brought me a coffee. My wrist did not hurt. A man in a Red Sox hat booked me for his mother's birthday. On Sunday, the town Facebook group posted a missing person notice. A woman named Lorraine had not come home from a walk. Her picture showed a smile and a red scarf. I remembered her from Friday. On Tuesday, police said they had found her by the river. No foul play. I read it twice. I played again on Wednesday. A craft beer bar messaged me about a Thursday residency. I went back to the shop to thank the owner. He said, "Remember the rule. Do not play to an empty room." That Thursday, 20 people sat at the bar. I played 2 sets. People actually listened. A man at the back yelled for an encore. I played a tune my father taught me. The manager booked me for the next month. On Sunday, while I waited for a sandwich, I looked at the obituaries. The man from the bar had died in his sleep. The photo matched. I told myself not to connect things. I failed. I made a list on my phone of each show and faces I recalled. In 2 weeks, 2 more names matched faces from the square. Causes were different. Timing was within 7 days. I skipped a week. I told the bar I was sick. My wrist pain came back the next day. My hands shook. It felt like withdrawal. Maybe it was panic. On Saturday, I went to the shop. "You missed your week," the owner said. "I am worried," I said, and told him my list. "People draw lines between dots," he said. "You came here because you were out of time. Now you have some. Keep your end. Do not chase shadows." "What if I bring it back?" "It will belong to the shop again," he said. "Your wrist will be your wrist again." I left with the instrument. On Sunday, I played at a farmer's market. I chose it because the crowd felt safe. I played for an hour and left. Bookings came. The TikTok clip pushed me to the radio. A festival called. A wedding emailed. I kept my rule. I kept the list. I read the obituaries. The pattern held often enough to matter. I tried to quit for good. The shop door was locked. A paper on the glass said closed for inventory. Through the window, I saw empty shelves. A reporter later told me the building was listed as vacant. A for lease sign soon appeared. I spoke to a priest. I said I had an object that helped me when I used it, and seemed to hurt others. He told me to put it down and speak to a counselor. He gave me a hotline number. I put the case in the closet and did not touch it for 9 days. On day 2, my wrist hurt so much I could not hold a mug. On day 7, I fainted in the hall. A doctor told me to rest. When I got home, I took the violin out and played open strings for 10 minutes. The pain eased. I went to the hospital lobby and asked to play for an hour. Patients and staff gathered. A man in a wheelchair closed his eyes. A nurse cried. 3 days later, I read his obituary. In December, a storm hit while I was booked at a small inn. Only 3 guests made it. The owner joked, "You only need 1 listener." I played by the fireplace. 4 days later, the inn posted that the owner had died of a heart attack. On Christmas Eve, I tested the rule. I went to the square late at night. No one else was there. I played 1 slow note. It fell flat. My wrist seized. I stopped and sat until it passed. I went home. In January, a promoter booked me at a hall in Worcester. I posted a teaser. The views climbed. That week, a man in a gray tie sat at the back of the bar while I played. He nodded once and left before I could reach him. The shop window still showed a for lease sign. I called my agent and said I might cancel. He told me not to overthink it. I kept playing. I try to choose rooms that feel sturdy. That is a guess. I watch faces now. I count 7 days after each show. If no bad news comes, I still wait. If bad news comes, I sit at the table and stare at the wall. Radio led to a short tour. An orchestra asked me to sit in for a holiday concert. The music felt easy. My body felt young. I also kept the list. The numbers are the numbers. Last week I played a benefit at the high school auditorium for the library. I said a librarian had once helped me. That was true. After the show, a man in a gray tie shook my hand and said, "Keep your end." When I looked up, he was gone. There is no reveal. There is no proof. There is only a man who needed to play to feel whole, a town that started to know his name, and a pattern that makes him sick. I could stop, and it might still happen. I could keep going, and it might be a coincidence forever. I do not know. Here is what I do know. The violin still lives in the old case. I still play to at least 1 person every week. I do not play to an empty room. When someone asks how to get better, I talk about slow practice and clean intonation, and choosing a day and sticking to it. I do not mention the list on my phone. I do not talk about the shop. I will keep trying to return the instrument. If the door ever opens again, I will set the case on the counter and leave. Until then, I will keep my rule. I will look at faces and hope they live a long time. I will not pretend I do not see what I see. I will not tell you what to believe. If you heard me this week, I hope you come back next time. If you do not, I hope your last good sound was a clean note and not a siren. I will be there with the bow, counting measures and days, and looking for a door that used to sit between a locksmith and a barber. I will not play to an empty room. The radio spot was a small morning show in Boston. They put me in a glass booth and told me to play for 2 minutes between ad breaks. The host asked where I learned, if my parents supported music, and if I had any advice for kids. I gave straight answers. A caller named Denise said she had not cried at music in years until that moment. The producer wrote her name on a whiteboard so the host could thank her. I drove home feeling proud and uneasy at the same time. 6 days later, a listener posted that Denise had passed away after a sudden illness. I stared at the post for a long time and did not comment. I started to track things I could confirm. I kept flyers, set lists, and dates. I cross-checked names against the local paper and public posts. I told myself this was a way to prove I was wrong. It did not help. Some weeks, nothing happened. Other weeks, 2 names showed up from the same crowd. I looked for a logic inside the pattern and did not find one. At one point, a detective called and asked if I had seen the owner of a shop on Mill Street known as Violetti and Sons. He said the landlord was trying to locate a former tenant. I told him I had no contact information. He asked about the instrument I used. I said it was on loan, and the shop was closed. He thanked me and hung up. He did not call again. I tried small tricks to test the rule. I streamed a set online, and set my phone to face the wall so no one would actually see me. It felt like cheating. My wrist began to ache 15 minutes in. I stopped, and the ache faded. I tried again the next day with the camera pointed at the floor. A neighbor knocked to ask me to keep it down. The pain left right away. I put that in the list under a heading that read, "Does a listener have to be present?" By spring, I could pay rent and not think about it. I bought new strings without doing math. My agent booked me for 2 months of dates across Massachusetts and Rhode Island. In Worcester, I played in a small hall that seats 400. The sound in the room was clean and dry. During the second piece, I saw an old man in the front row smile like he recognized a friend. During the encore, a young couple stood by the exit and held hands. I watched the calendar for the next week and felt sick every morning. On day 6, the old man's photo appeared online with a note from his daughter. On day 7, the couple posted a black ribbon. I shut off my phone and did not turn it on until the next afternoon. I searched for the shop online. Nothing. No business listing, no property record under that name. An older article in a local paper about downtown history had a photo of that block with a caption that listed a locksmith and a barber. No music store. I went through the photo archives at the library and asked a clerk if the archives ever showed a violin shop on Mill Street. She said not in any photo she had seen. I told her maybe it was short-lived. She shrugged. I did not say more. One night after a show in Providence, I left the instrument on the back seat and walked into a diner to eat. When I came out, a man in a vest and tie was standing by my car. For a second, I thought it was the shop owner. The man was younger, with the same formal style. He said he was a fan and asked to see the violin. I said no and put the case in the trunk. He smiled and said, "You keep your end. The instrument will keep its end." When I turned to ask what that meant, he had walked away and was gone by the time I reached the corner. I told a friend about the pattern one night after too much wine. He laughed at first, then saw I was serious. He pulled up 3 news links on his phone and said, "Life happens. You see it because you were there too. It is a trick your brain is doing." I wanted to believe him. I still do. I went home and read my list again. The lines felt like grooves I could not sand smooth. I tried to play to an empty room one more time. I rented a rehearsal studio by the hour in a basement downtown. The manager gave me a key and left. I shut the door, tuned, and started a scale. My wrist burned. I stopped. I sat on the floor with my back to the wall and waited. A janitor walked past the door pushing a cart. The pain eased. I finished the hour and paid at the desk. The manager thanked me for the business. I said nothing. By the time summer came back around, the town knew my name. The square crowds got thicker. I kept the sets short. I felt older faces drawing my attention in a way I hated. I made rules for myself. I would not take birthday gigs for people over 70. I would not play hospital wards except in the lobby. I would not take private requests at funerals. These rules made no sense and fixed nothing. I kept them anyway. At the Worcester Hall a second time, the promoter asked if I wanted to meet a donor who supported the series. The donor shook my hand and said his father used to tell him that certain instruments keep their players alive and paid as long as they play by the house rules. He did not wink. He did not smile. He walked away to talk to someone in a tuxedo with a drink in his hand. I have thought about going on stage one night and telling the crowd about my list. I picture asking everyone to leave, then playing one note to a bare room and accepting whatever comes next. Then I imagine the faces that do not know any of this, and I do not do it. I keep my end. I play to at least one person. I go home and count to 7. The first time the black candle bent toward the corner of my kitchen, I told myself it was the draft from an old window and not a reply. Harbor Point, Maine looks harmless in postcards. White steeple, lobster traps, water flat as glass when the wind behaves. I moved there in October to finish a book no one wanted, and to be farther away from the polite concern in my agent's voice. My apartment sat above a bakery on Mill Street, floors tilting toward the harbor as if the building remembered boats. 2 blocks down, the public library kept its lights low and its gossip lower. Ellen Alden wore a name tag the size of a postage stamp and scarves like statements. She learned I wrote horror and started pointing me toward odd corners. A 19th century pamphlet on New England spiritualism. A 1971 weekly about a teacher who vanished near the marsh. A cardboard box labeled Archives Privet. One rainy Tuesday she asked if I'd ever been downstairs. Not for everyone, she said, then held a key like a dare. The basement smelled like wet paper and slow electricity. In a wire cage, boxes wore hand-lettered labels. Ship registers, ephemera, maps, special collections. From the last box, she lifted a book wrapped in faded black cloth. A dollop of dark wax sealed the front like an old scab. No title, Ellen said. Donor anonymous. It creeps me out. Inside, the pages were brittle with a slanted hand that dragged its feet. The first sentence hooked me like a wrong note. Light invoked at midnight is not light. At the back sat a waxy stub of a candle, black as a dry well, with a slip of paper wrapped around it like a prescription. 3 breaths. 1 name. 1 hour. Do not answer. Can I check it out? I asked, already knowing I shouldn't. She hesitated, studied me as if measuring how much of me would be left afterward, and then filled out a card. A week, she said. No renewals. I wanted the kind of pages that stop your heart and start it again. That first night, midnight stood up in my kitchen like a person. I set the candle on a saucer, opened the book, breathed 3 times and said the syllables printed on the slip. They weren't Latin, only pretending, thick and old in the mouth. The wick took flame, leaned hard toward the seam where the fridge met the wall and held there as if listening. I wrote for an hour as if my hands had been fitted with new bones. Sentences unspooled that had never unspooled for me. When the clock clicked to 1, the flame stretched thin, snapped out, and the apartment resumed its small hums. I laughed alone and sent my agent 3 chapters before I lost nerve. In the morning, the town sounded off, like someone had nudged the volume knob left. Ellen called to say the library would close early. An accident on Route 1. Traffic backed up to the bridge. I walked to the harbor and watched fog behave like a living thing. I told myself the candle was theater. The second night I lit it anyway. Again, the flame inclined to the dead corner. Again, the hour tore by in a spill of paragraphs clean enough to drink. 10 minutes before 1, someone knocked on my door. 3 soft, patient taps like a friend who forgot your number. Do not answer. I kept my eyes on the draft. The knocks came once more, then stopped. The candle bowed, nodding as if agreeing with a speaker I refused to hear. By morning, the diner buzzed with a single name floating on every table. Carol, the waitress said, when she poured coffee into the saucer and not the cup. The kid's story lady. They found her car by the marsh. A tourist asked what marsh and got looks that ended the conversation. I walked home on streets that felt like someone else's dream. I opened the document I'd sent my agent. In the previous night's chapter, a teacher with a kind voice leaves her car by the marsh after a volunteer shift and doesn't return. I shut the laptop, then opened it again. Coincidence is only a word until it's yours. I avoided the candle for one night. On Saturday, last day before the book was due, I brought it back to the library. Ellen was not at the desk. A teenager with a nose ring told me the archives were closed. A typed sign on the door said the same thing, in a font that looked apologetic. That night, my apartment collected darkness like a bowl collecting rain. I lit the candle. The flame turned toward the door and held. When the knocks came, I did not move. 47 minutes later, when the hour faded, the hallway light outside blinked off on its own, and the hair on my arms lifted to greet nothing. Sunday morning smelled like snow, though the sky was clear. Down by the harbor, 2 men tying a skiff talked too loudly. Ellen never made it in. One said, "Door open, coat still on the hook." I stood there pretending to text until the words rose in my throat like iodine. The candle stub had 1 hour left. I told myself I'd throw it away, and nearly did. Instead, I bought a new black candle at a tourist shop that sold nautical charts and cinnamon brooms. The clerk called it Decker. I didn't argue. That afternoon, my agent called. "Whatever this is," he said, "it's the best work you've done." I sent it out. People are reading now. He sounded not hopeful but relieved, like someone who had been braced for a crash and heard. Instead, the tires grip. That night, I failed my own rule. When the 3 knocks arrived, I went to the door and pressed my ear to the wood. On the other side was silence, shaped like someone listening back. The candle flame leaned so far that it should have kissed the wax. Something exhaled, disappointed, and retreated. I returned to the table and wrote the ugliest pages of my life, honest and crooked, and not mine. Monday's paper stacked 3 stories. Carol M. still missing. Librarian Ellen A. not seen since Saturday. Harbor Point author finds new voice. My headshot from last year grinned like a stranger. A voicemail waited from a man who introduced himself as Detective Collins. He asked when I last spoke to Miss Alden, and whether I might answer a few questions about a book kept in the archives. I wrote his number on a slip of paper and set it under the saucer like an offering. By Thursday, the new candle had burned to half. I lit it at midnight, breathed 3 times, spoke the name on the slip, then said my own. The room thinned, like heat shimmering above asphalt. The air near the door changed temperature. The narrator in my head described hands splayed against painted wood, measuring it, patient as rain. I didn't look at the door, which was a kind of looking. At 12:58, 3 soft knocks, a courtesy. "Do not answer," I said aloud to the empty room. The way people talk to themselves when they want the house to believe them. When the hour went dark, I touched the place the knocks had landed. The wood had the temperature of wood. My hand smelled faintly of old wax and salt. The next morning, Detective Collins met me on the sidewalk. He had a farmer's sunlines and the patience of someone accustomed to being rehearsed at. "You signed out an unmarked book," he said. "It wasn't checked back in." "I left it on the desk Sunday," I said. "Ask the kid with the nose ring." "We did," he said. He didn't see it. He held my gaze until I looked away. "If it turns up, bring it straight to me." At home, I searched everywhere. A book doesn't belong. Freezer, oven, laundry basket, behind the couch, under the tub's claw feet. Nothing. The saucer sat where I'd left it. The candle, shorter than memory, stood like a stubbed finger. That afternoon, a brown envelope waited at my door, with no return address. Inside lay a single page torn from the book. The edges are feathered with fibers. In 2 hands, my slanted one and a taller, tidy hand, those 6 words braided over each other. "Light invoked at midnight is not light." I brought it to the station. Collins photocopied it and slid the original back to me as if it had always been mine. "Keep your doors locked," he said. "If anything else arrives, don't handle it more than necessary." At night, I tried not to write. The apartment clicked to itself. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator motor took a breath, like a person deciding not to speak. My laptop glowed with a first line so good it frightened me. "I am not a better person than ambition." I lit the candle and let the hour take me. The knocks started immediately, as if an arm had hovered all day waiting for permission. I gripped the edge of the table until the hour ended, then slept badly and dreamed of a room with 4 corners and a 5th that kept moving. News traveled in small-town loops. 2 more envelopes arrived. One held a photocopy of an old town ledger entry from 1903. "Donation received, private." Someone had penciled downstairs, "Left cage." The second held a clipping of Ellen with a pair of oversized scissors, opening a children's wing, smile honest and heavy. I taped both above my desk. I told myself I was documenting and not decorating. The publisher preempted the book on a Thursday afternoon. My agent said the number like he was reading a blood pressure that might kill or cure me. "They want to announce next week," he said. "You will need pages for a second by spring." That night, the first snow of the year fell wrong. Heavy, early, damp. The lights browned and came back on. The candle flared without my hand. as if it had learned the trick of fire by watching. I didn't speak the words. The flame bowed anyway toward the door. The wood swelled as if it were breathing. I blew the candle out with a pinch, and the darkness felt like a pillow pressed over the room. The smell it left wasn't smoke but old salt and iron and the air of a basement that keeps its secrets under dust. I slept with the lamps on and the bat beside the couch. In the morning, a final envelope sat centered on the mat. The photo inside had been taken from the landing outside my door, angled through the narrow gap between frame and floor. In the foreground were my bare feet. Beyond them, the seam of the door. The timestamp matched the first night of knocking. On the back, in my hand or his, 4 words: "Do not answer, Adrian." I brought that one to the station too. Collings looked at the photo for a long time and didn't look at me. He asked where I would be that night. I said home writing. He said, "Keep it to daylight if you can." I keep the candle in the freezer now. As if cold were a language it couldn't understand. It still burns. Some nights I tell myself none of it happened, that the town would have lost those 2 people no matter what hour I fed to the dark. Other nights I press my palm to the door where the knocks land and feel nothing except the certainty that wood remembers what our heads prefer to forget. People online ask how I found this voice. I type answers about discipline and cutting the Wi-Fi and turning off the phone. And when I'm honest, the truth that sounds like a superstition. Cut the lights and listen. I don't tell them about the hour with teeth or the rule with a heartbeat. I don't tell them the book is missing or that the words are learning me back. Harbor Point fog has started coming in on days the forecast promises sun. The fish plant hums at midnight like paper turning. The bakery downstairs burns the morning batch, and everyone says it smells fine. I keep writing. When the power blinks, I count 3 breaths before I let go of the air. If there's arithmetic to this, I haven't learned it. If it's a person, he knocks politely and never walks away far enough to be gone. If it's nothing, then nothing has become excellent at timing. I tell myself I'll stop after the next chapter, after the next check clears, after the next polite visit. I do not answer. Then I light the candle like a man who doesn't own a door. Light invoked at midnight is not light. I believe it now. The candle waits on its saucer. Deadlines don't move. Tonight I'll try not to answer. Maybe the knocks come. Maybe the words arrive like a tide, deciding the shore that thought it belonged. I did not go to New Orleans to hunt for a legend. I went because a client wanted new portraits with an old city feel, and my agent said their preferred photographer was reliable. His name was August Leon. He used film cameras and had a studio in the Meridni. The client said his work always looked timeless and sold product. That was enough for me. I landed on a warm Thursday and checked into a short-term rental off Chart Street. The studio sat on a quiet block. A small sign above the door read Lawn Portraits. Inside, the air smelled like wood and fixer. An assistant named Mara led me in. She looked young, wore simple black clothes and moved fast. The main room had high ceilings, white walls and controlled light. Clothing racks stood on one side, lights and tripods on the other. At the back was a dark door with a metal handle and a sliding bolt. August stepped out from behind a divider. He was thin, somewhere in his 60s, with neat white hair and a steady voice. He shook my hand and thanked me for coming. The plan was simple: a clean corporate look, a casual look, and a classic black and white portrait. He said we would do the last look in the portrait room. I asked what that was. He said it was a controlled space with old equipment and fewer variables. The morning was easy. August shot the first 2 looks with a modern digital body. His direction was clear and brief. Chin lower, eyes past me. Breathe out. He checked the screen, adjusted a light, and moved on. He did not flirt or ramble. He kept the room calm. At lunch I walked to a deli, ate a sandwich, and tried to ignore a slow tiredness that did not match the work. When I came back, Mara wheeled a rack toward the dark door. She said the portrait room would take about an hour. She told me to bring simple body language and let August lead the pacing. She unlocked the door and waved me in. The portrait room had no windows. The walls were matte gray. A large format camera sat on a metal stand. The lens was the size of a fist. A partition hid a small sink and trays. On the wall near the door was a framed sheet of rules. Do not enter without permission. Stand where you are placed. Do not touch the camera. Do not speak while the shutter is open. Do not look into the dark. August explained the process. He would shoot wet plate collodion. Exposures would be several seconds. I needed to be still. He would develop each plate immediately. He said the room kept conditions steady and reduced waste. He said it was safe. He placed my chair 2 feet from the camera, then shifted it an inch left. He set a low light to my right, and another behind me, pointed at the wall. He told me to think of a clear idea I could hold. He lifted a hand for silence, pulled the dark slide, and opened the shutter. The room changed without sound. It did not feel colder or hotter. It felt like the air paused. I looked at a piece of tape on the side of the camera and counted in my head. After a few seconds, he closed the shutter, replaced the slide, and went behind the partition. Trays moved. Water ran. He brought out a wet plate on a clip and showed me the image. It was reversed and very sharp. My face looked like mine, only more plain. He asked for another plate. We made 4 exposures. On the 3rd, sweat formed on my neck even though the air felt normal. On the 4th, a patch in the top corner looked darker than the wall and seemed to sway once. I kept my eyes on the tape. The rule about not looking into the dark sounded silly until the moment I wanted to test it. He loaded a 5th plate, said we would do a shorter exposure, and told me to relax my jaw. 2 seconds into the hold, something pressed lightly against the back of my chair. It was not a bump, it was a steady touch. I did not turn. The pressure left when the shutter closed. My hands shook. I kept still and said nothing. The last plate looked balanced and clean. August said we were done. Mara opened the door, and cooler air moved in. It felt normal. August told me to rest and drink water, because the old process could dehydrate people. He said he would deliver files to the client and send me prints. That night, I could not get warm. I wore a sweatshirt and socks and still shivered on and off. Around 3 in the morning, I checked the mirror. I looked like a tired version of myself. I forced sleep and made it through to daylight. The client emailed the next day to say the work was excellent. My agent texted me a string of emojis and said this could change my rate. I did not celebrate. My hands cramped when I boiled pasta. I sat on the kitchen floor until the water boiled over. I flew back to Austin on Sunday and tried to reset. On Monday, a friend told me I looked great. On Tuesday, a small bald patch showed at my hairline. On Wednesday, my knees ached after a short drive. I brushed my teeth and spat pink foam into the sink. I told myself stress can do that. I made a doctor's appointment and kept working. I messaged Mara on Instagram. No reply. I left a voicemail at the studio. No callback. When my gums bled again, I booked a flight and went back to New Orleans without telling the client. I told my agent I wanted street images for my portfolio. He said to bring a rain shell. The studio door was locked with a note that said closed for shoot. I waited at a coffee shop across the street until late afternoon. Mara stepped out with a trash bag. I asked for a minute. She kept her eyes on some point past my shoulder as if this were a routine she knew well. I said I needed to ask about the portrait room because something was wrong with me. She said they did not discuss the process, and I should see a doctor. I told her I had, and listed my symptoms. I asked if anyone else had reported similar issues. I asked if there was a way to reverse it. She said I had signed a release. The process was voluntary. Outcomes were not promised, and there was nothing she could do. Then she went back inside and slid the bolt. I slept at a cheap hotel and stared at the ceiling. Fear did not hit like a movie scare. It sat low and steady. I felt like I was moving down a step every day without lifting my feet. In the morning, I went back. The door was open. August stood near the dark door with his hand on the frame. He did not look surprised. I told him I needed straight answers. He said the room takes what you bring and shows what is there. I said that was not enough. I described the pressure on the chair and the cold that would not leave. I listed the hair loss, bleeding gums, and joint pain. He said the room and rig were old, built by a photographer trained in Europe before the war, brought here in the 50s and taught to him later. He said the process was safe when handled correctly. Some people reacted. Most did not. He screamed when he could. I had been requested by the client. I asked what was in the corner. He said it was light fall off. I asked why he printed a rule about not looking into the dark. He said people ruin plates when they move. I asked whether an exposure could be undone. He said no. I asked whether I could sit again and give something back. He said that was not how it worked. He said I could sit again and make another portrait if I wanted. He let me stand in the doorway. The air felt normal until I took 2 steps in. Then a faint pressure built in my ears like on a plane. I stepped back, and it went away. That was the only measurable thing I could find. I asked to see the client records. He said no. I asked to contact past clients. He said no. I left without shouting because shouting would not change the rules. Back in Austin, the phone did nothing. I wore hats to castings. My agent told me to lean into a sharper look. I booked an outdoor brand and did the job on low sleep. After the job, I slept 12 hours without alarms. I began to keep notes. Time, food, sleep, pain, bleeding. The notes were boring and gave me no firm pattern. Some days felt normal. Some days felt wrong in small ways I could not prove. 2 months after the shoot, a black box with my name arrived. Inside were 3 prints and a card with care instructions. It said to keep them out of direct sunlight and not to display them in bedrooms. It offered retrieval if I wanted to dispose of them, but listed no working contact. The prints were the black and white portraits from the room. They were excellent. I believed them more than I liked them. I put the prints back in the box and slid the box into the closet. I felt better for a day. The next day, a new line formed at the corner of my mouth. I am 30. That line did not match anything else about my face. I stopped checking as often. I told my agent I would not work with the studio again. He said that was fine and sent me other options. He did not ask why. The campaign kept adding jobs to my calendar. The morning after I turned down a second session in New Orleans, I woke up shivering even with the heater on. It passed by lunch. I wrote it down in my notes and moved on because moving on is what work requires. If this sounds vague, it is because I do not have proof. I also do not want to claim a curse and make this a neat story. I think the room is a box that enforces rules I do not know. It lets a person be seen in a way most work does not. For some people, that is easy. For others, there is a cost. I might be in the second group. That does not make me special. It just makes me unlucky or sensitive or both. I still model. I still travel. I take vitamins. I walk in the morning. I drink water because August told me to drink water, and it is reasonable advice, no matter what you believe. I do not hang the prints. When I think about the room, I remember the rule about not looking into the dark. My eyes tried to go there anyway. It felt like the room wanted that more than anything. A brand asked me last week to return to New Orleans for a follow-up portrait to match the look of the launch. The rate was good. The dates were open. I said I was not available. They said they could wait. I said my schedule was uncertain. They will hire someone else. I hope the person has a clear head and a strong body. I hope the rules are kind to them. I will add one more thing that I have not told anyone because I do not like the way it sounds. One night I woke at 3:12 a.m. and felt a presence at the side of the bed. I kept still and stared at the ceiling. I did not feel breath or touch. I felt the same small pressure in my ears I had felt 2 steps inside the portrait room. It lasted about 20 seconds and went away. I slept again and said nothing in the morning. I called the studio the next day and asked to return the prints. The voicemail picked up. No one called me back. I mailed the box to the address with a note asking them to keep or destroy the prints and to call me. The box came back with a sticker that said moved, left no address. I moved apartments the next month. I put the box on the top shelf of a new closet and left it there. The new place has a bright window. I have had fewer bad days since the move. I have not had a day that felt like it did before the shoot. That might be stress. That might be age. That might be the room. I cannot assign a number to it. If you ask me whether you should sit for August, I cannot answer for you. He makes excellent work. He keeps a clean studio. He prints the rules on the wall. The city will always have people like him working behind heavy doors. If you go, drink water, listen to his directions, and stand where you are placed. Do not ask for more than you need. When you receive your print, Do not hang it over your bed. If you notice changes that do not match the calendar, see a doctor, keep notes. If the notes show nothing clear, choose a belief you can live with. That is all most of us get. I still look at Mara's account once a week. She posts coffee cups, sidewalks, and bands on Frenchman Street. She never posts the studio. In the background of one photo, a man with white hair stands near a wall. He faces away. No one in the frame looks at him. It could be anyone. I saved the shot and then deleted it because keeping it felt like feeding the wrong thing. The day I left New Orleans the first time, I stopped outside the studio. The door was closed. The bolt was slid. Across the street, a couple took a selfie. The city moved around us the way cities do. I counted to 7 for no reason and went to the airport. When the plane took off, my ears popped and cleared. I decided not to decide what that meant. I keep my calendar full. I keep the prints in the box. I am trying to learn guitar, even though I am slow at it. I say yes to jobs with bright windows and simple setups. I am trying to be the kind of person who does not walk into rooms he does not understand. I am not there yet. If I ever learn something that explains the portrait room, I will write it down. If not, this is what I have. A description of a place where you sit, hold still, and wait while a shutter opens and closes. You bring yourself in and carry yourself out. The room does the same thing every time. The difference is you. The air in late September carried that mix of crisp coolness and sweet decay that always came with apple harvest season in rural Washington. From the highway, the Crane Orchard didn't look much different from the other farms scattered along the valley. Rows and rows of trees, their leaves just beginning to turn heavy with bright red fruit. But locals swore the Crane apples were different, bigger, sweeter. The kind of thing that made chefs in Seattle drive 3 hours just to load up a truck. I wasn't from around here. I'd been bouncing between seasonal jobs for years, working long hours in exchange for cash and a place to sleep. When I saw the posting for orchard help, the pay was better than average, and the ad promised free lodging on site. So I called, and 2 days later I was unloading my duffel bag into a small bunkhouse behind the barn. The man who greeted me was Elijah Crane himself. Tall, wiry, with silver hair tied back and a face that looked like it had seen too many harsh winters. His handshake was firm, his voice low and deliberate. "You work hard, you eat well," he said. "No stealing fruit, no wandering after dark. You do that, you will have no trouble here." I thought it was a strange warning, but I nodded. A job was a job. The first week was exactly what you'd expect. Long hours in the fields hauling ladders, filling baskets, and moving crates to the cold storage. There were maybe 15 of us, a mix of locals and migrant workers. Some had been coming back here for years. One of them, a man named Tomas, told me this was the most profitable orchard in the state. "Elijah doesn't sell to big distributors," Tomas said one afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow. "He sells to people who pay anything for quality. Restaurants, hotels, even ships it out of state." I asked him how Elijah got apples like this. Tomas shrugged. "Good soil, good water. That's what he says." But a few days later, I overheard something else. 2 of the workers were talking in low voices behind the packing shed. "That's 3 gone this season," one said. "Always the new ones." "Shut up," the other replied sharply. "You want to keep your job?" I pretended I hadn't heard. Still, it stuck in my mind. The Crane property had one tree that stood apart from the rest. You couldn't miss it. Taller, older, its trunk wide enough that 3 men couldn't wrap their arms around it. It sat right in the middle of the orchard, a bare patch of ground circling its base where no grass or weeds grew. Elijah told us never to touch it. "The apples from that tree weren't for sale," he said. "They're for the orchard." One night, after a long day, I couldn't sleep. The bunkhouse was stuffy, so I stepped outside for air. The moon lit the orchard in pale silver, shadows stretching long across the rows. That's when I saw a figure moving between the trees, heading straight for the old one. Even in the dim light, I recognized Elijah, dragging something heavy wrapped in a dark tarp. I froze. He stopped at the base of the tree, set down the bundle and began digging. the sound of the shovel cutting into the earth, carried clearly in the still night. After a while, he rolled the bundle into the hole. The shape of it was wrong for a sack of fertilizer. Too long, too human. My stomach turned, but I didn't move. He covered the hole, scattered leaves over it, and stood there for a while as if listening for something. Then he walked back toward the house. The next morning, I passed the old tree on my way to the far rows. The dirt around it looked undisturbed, just as it always did. If I hadn't seen Elijah the night before, I'd have thought I imagined it. A week later, another worker disappeared. His name was Carl, a young guy from Spokane. One morning, his bed was empty, his things still there, and Elijah told us Carl went home early. No one questioned it out loud, but I noticed Tomas looking uneasy. I decided to ask him straight. "Do people go missing here?" He stiffened, eyes darting toward the barn. "Don't ask questions you don't want answered," he said, and walked away. It was close to the end of the season when I finally got close enough to see more. Elijah had driven into town, leaving the orchard quiet, except for a few of us in the far rows. I slipped away and made my way to the old tree. The smell hit me first, a faint, sour rot beneath the sweetness of the apples. I dug at the bare patch of dirt with my hands, just enough to loosen it. A few inches down, my fingers caught on something rough. I pulled it free, a torn scrap of flannel, stiff with dried blood. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the bunkhouse made my skin crawl. Just before dawn, I heard it again, the sound of digging. I peeked out the window and saw two figures this time, Elijah and someone else. They moved in, practiced silence, lowering another tarp-wrapped shape into the ground. A few nights later, I saw something stranger still. It was just past midnight. From my bunk, I noticed a faint glow coming from the orchard. I slipped outside, moving low between the rows until I could see the old tree. A ring of candles surrounded its base. Elijah knelt in front of it, his hands pressed to the bark, speaking words I didn't recognize. The other figure, tall, thin face hidden by a hood, poured something dark and thick from a bucket into the soil. The smell of iron filled the air. Blood. The wind shifted, and the candles flickered. Elijah raised his head, and for a moment I thought he looked right at me. I bolted back to the bunkhouse, heart pounding. The next day, Carl's belongings were gone from the bunkhouse. Elijah didn't mention him. No one did. I made up my mind to leave. I told Tomas I was heading out after the next delivery truck came. He looked at me for a long moment and said only, "Don't eat the apples they give you." The morning I planned to go, Elijah caught me as I was loading my bag into the back of my old pickup. "Heading out?" he asked. "Yeah, got another job lined up." He nodded slowly, then handed me a paper bag. "For the road," he said. Inside were 3 perfect, glossy apples. I mumbled thanks and drove off without looking back. About an hour down the road, hunger got the better of me. I took one of the apples from the bag. The skin was smooth, the flesh crisp and almost unnaturally sweet, but on the third bite, my teeth hit something hard. I spat it into my hand, a small white shard, not a seed, not a pebble, a human tooth. My hand shook so badly I almost drove off the road. I threw the apple out the window and pulled over, breathing hard. When I opened the paper bag to toss the rest, I saw something dark at the bottom. I dumped the apples onto the roadside. A single shriveled finger rolled out onto the gravel. I never went to the police. Who would believe me? I'd left the scene, thrown away the only proof. Besides, in towns like that, men like Elijah had friends everywhere. A month later, I saw a TV segment about the crane orchard. Smiling chefs biting into enormous red apples, Elijah shaking hands with local officials. No mention of missing workers. No mention of the tree. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of standing beneath its branches. I hear voices from beneath the ground, whispering in the dark. When I wake, I can still taste the sweetness of that apple and feel the grit of enamel between my teeth. I don't eat fruit anymore. I moved to the coast because I was tired of failing inland. The town was called Gray Harbor, a quiet place on Highway 1 where tourists stopped for scenery and locals tried to keep the lights on through winter. I slept on a friend's couch over a surf shop and took the first job I could get, night prep at a restaurant that everyone in town talked about like it was a church. The place was called Clarion. It sat in a converted cannery building with big windows and a polished wood bar. People lined up before the doors opened, even on weeknights. The chef and owner, Elena Costa, had been profiled by magazines for her farm-to-coast approach. That was the line. The part the magazines never mentioned was the midnight menu. It wasn't printed, it wasn't posted. It happened when the clock crossed 12 a.m., and it was only for a small table that had been arranged in advance. On my first night, the sous chef, a precise guy named Bryce, showed me the walk-in, the dry storage, the fish station, and the rules. Don't touch the black-lidded Cambros. Don't open the locked drawer under the guard manger counter. Don't ask questions about the midnight menu. If chef asks for something, say yes, chef, get it, and keep moving. Most of the food was straightforward. Rockfish, Dungeness crab, local greens, house-baked bread. It was good. You could tell why people paid. But around 11:30 p.m. every Friday, the energy changed. Servers spoke in quiet voices. Tickets stopped printing. Chef Elena would wash her hands, dry them on a separate towel, and unpack items I hadn't seen during the rest of the night. A small jar of black salt, an envelope with a rubber band around it, a glass vial with something amber inside, and a strip of parchment with writing so small you couldn't make it out from across the line. The first time I saw the midnight menu go out, it was 3 courses for a table of 4. The plates were simple and almost plain. Soft boiled quail egg in a dark broth, thin slices of fish I didn't recognize with a smear of something sweet and sharp, a custard with a burned top and a single blackberry. The guests closed their eyes when they tasted. The room felt like someone had lowered the volume without touching the knob. When the custards went out, Chef Elena stepped away from the line and stood behind the pass watching. She didn't smile. She didn't blink much. When the plates came back, almost clean, she glanced at her watch, pressed 2 fingers to the underside of her wrist, nodded once and said, "Thank you, everyone. That's it." I went home at 2 in the morning, too wired to sleep. I scrolled the town's community page on my phone until I dozed off. The next week, a post appeared about a man named Caleb who hadn't shown up at his boat slip. He worked at the marina. I recognized him from Friday night. He'd been at the table for the midnight menu. People in town said he probably took off for a few days. Then the Coast Guard found his skiff adrift near the kelp beds. Nobody. No note. I told myself it was nothing. Gray Harbor was full of bad luck. But once you think you see a pattern, your brain doesn't stop looking. Next Friday, another table booked the midnight menu. A woman I recognized from the hardware store was one of the 4. She laughed loudly at the start of the meal, then got quieter as the courses came out, like the others. She clapped once when it ended. 6 days later, her husband posted a photo of her on the community page. She'd gone for a run on the bluffs and never came home. I didn't say any of this to anyone. I didn't want to be the new guy with weird ideas. Instead, I watched. If a diner for the midnight menu came in early for drinks, I noted their jacket, their hair, the way they rested their hands on the table. If I ran into one at the grocery store the next week, I made a mental note. Too much of this, and you start to feel like you're the one making it happen by noticing. But the pattern didn't care about what I believed. On a slow Tuesday, Chef Elena asked me to stay late to break down halibut. We worked in silence. When we finished, she said, "You're careful. Most people rush through fish and ruin it." I said thanks, and asked how long she'd been in Gray Harbor. "Long enough," she said. Then she asked, almost casually, "What do you think of the midnight menu?" I told her the truth. I could say out loud. That made the room go quiet. That people seemed moved by it. "It's not for everyone," she said. "People who sit for it know what they want. They may not know why, but they know." I asked what was in the little envelope she used. She smiled without showing teeth. "Special seasonings, family things." Then she said goodnight and went upstairs to the small office she kept above the prep area. After that, she trusted me with more work. I blanched bones for stock. I handled the crab live and set them in the boil. I cleaned the small glass vials we used for oils. I still didn't touch the black-lidded Cambros, and I still didn't look in the locked drawer. I wanted to keep my job. The third Friday I worked. The midnight menu table was 2 men and a woman in their 50s. The woman wore a bright scarf. She laughed like she wasn't embarrassed to be happy. She waved at a server she knew by name. While Chef prepped the first course, the scarf slipped off the woman's shoulders and landed near the line. I picked it up and started toward the dining room. Chef said, "Leave it on the hook, please," without looking up. Her voice was flat. I hung the scarf by the staff sink and went back to my station. That night, I had trash duty. I took a bag out to the alley around 12:45 a.m. and found the back door propped open with a brick. At the end of the alley under a streetlight, the 3 diners from the midnight menu stood close together. The 2 men were hugging. The woman wiped her eye and said something I couldn't hear. They looked like people who'd just had a serious conversation and decided something important. When I came back inside, Chef was at the sink, rinsing a spoon under water and humming a short, 3-note tune on repeat. Not a melody, more like a reminder. On Sunday, the community page had a missing person post for a high school English teacher. The photo was of the woman with the scarf. Her name was Julia. It was written like I should have already known it. At this point, I felt stupid staying quiet. I figured I had 2 choices: ask someone who might tell me something, or open a door I wasn't supposed to. I tried the first choice. I caught Bryce, the sous chef, on his smoke break and said I didn't get the midnight menu. He flicked ash and said, "You don't have to, you just have to prep it right. Then tell me what's in the envelopes." House mix. And the vials? House oils. And the drawer? He looked me up and down like he was measuring the cost of answering versus the cost of having me angry. Then he said, "Don't. The last guy who wanted to know everything got bored and left. That's a good outcome." "I saw the candles last Friday," I said. "That was a lie. Out back after close." He stubbed his cigarette out hard and said, "Get back inside. You talk too much for someone who's been here 3 weeks." The second choice happened because of a mistake. A server tripped over the pass and knocked a stack of spoons to the floor. I crouched to help pick them up and saw Chef's key ring on a low shelf. The key to the drawer was tagged with a bit of red tape. I knew if I walked away, I might never get another chance. I slipped the key in my pocket, stood, and set the spoons on the counter. At 11:50 p.m., while Chef stood at the host stand talking to the midnight table about wine, I slid the key into the drawer lock and turned it. It was smoother than it should have been. Inside were small, labeled envelopes. Each was a heavy paper sleeve with a name written in tight, careful letters. There were also 3 smaller vials with handwritten dates. No spices, no herbs. The envelopes didn't crinkle like they held powder. They bent like they held fabric or hair. I heard footsteps. I closed the drawer, turned the key, and slid it back on the shelf in one motion. Chef walked past and said, "Quail eggs in 2, please." I cracked them, lowered them into simmering broth, and tried not to draw a conclusion I couldn't undraw. On the 4th Friday, a couple in their 20s took the midnight menu. They were nervous and excited. She kept touching the base of her throat when she laughed. He checked his phone, and then put it face down like he'd promised to be present. Chef prepared the first course with that same easy focus. I plated, wiped rims, and passed to the servers. On the second course, she emptied one of the envelopes into a small bowl and shook a few dark flakes into the sauce. She did it the same way every time, with a small tilt of the wrist like she'd done it 1,000 times. That night, I stood by the dish sink with the sound of water running and made a list in my head. Names I knew, faces that matched posts. The marina worker, the teacher, and a bookkeeper from the credit union who had stopped by on her birthday. If I was wrong, I was just building a ghost story to scare myself. If I was right, I was standing 6 feet from a crime I couldn't explain. I told myself to quit and leave town. I told myself to call the sheriff. I didn't either. I went home, fell into a bad sleep, and woke to a text from a number I didn't recognize. "You're invited to sit for the midnight menu. Sunday 12 a.m. No charge. Bring no guests. Reply yes to confirm." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed no and deleted the thread. I didn't tell anyone. I showed up for work like nothing had changed. Sunday night, chef said, "Your station's covered. You're off at 11. I nodded and left. I didn't sleep. I sat in my friend's dark living room and listened to the ocean through the window. Monday morning, a man from the sheriff's office stood at the bar when I came in. He asked to speak with the chef. They went into the office. 15 minutes later, he left. The chef came down and told us a woman had drowned near the South Pier. She said it like she was reading the weather. We closed the restaurant that night, out of respect. On Wednesday, I couldn't help it. I opened the community page and scrolled until I found the post. The drowned woman was one of the two from Sunday's midnight menu invite. Not me, the other. Her boyfriend's name was tagged in the comments. He wrote that she'd gone for a walk by herself in the early morning and slipped. People argued about railings and city budgets and dangerous tourism. No one mentioned the restaurant. I lasted one more week. During prep, I started making mistakes. My hands shook when I cut. I over-reduced a sauce and had to make it again. Chef noticed and told me to take a break and go breathe. I went out to the alley and stood by the garbage bin. The smell of old shellfish and bleach made my eyes water. When I came back, Chef was standing by my station. She held the drawer key between two fingers. She set it on the counter and said, "We leave our keys where they belong so we don't lose them." Her voice was calm. She didn't say, "I know you opened it." She didn't have to. I nodded. "Yes, chef." "You're a hard worker," she said. "If you stay out of things you don't understand, you'll have a good run here." I thought about the word run and the way she said it. I thought about the envelopes and the flakes that weren't spice. I thought about the two diners at the end of the alley, saying goodbye like a rehearsal. "I am giving notice," I said. "I will finish the week." She looked past me at the line and said, "All right," as if I'd told her we were 86 on tomatoes. On my last night, the midnight menu was for a single guest, a man in a suit who knew how to act like he'd been to places like this. The chef cooked as usual, 3 courses, clean plates and the quiet in the room. When it was done, the man stood, shook Chef's hand and left through the side door. Chef watched him go, then went upstairs. I wiped my station and took out the trash. In the alley by the door, there was a paper bag with my name on it. Inside were a loaf of the house bread, a small jar of the black salt, and a handwritten note, "For the road. Thank you for your work. A." I left the salt on the dumpster and took the bread. On the walk home, I passed the South Pier and saw the flowers taped to the railing. The ocean moved like it always does, not caring about the names we give to the people who fall in. I wish I could say I blew the whistle. I didn't. I left Gray Harbor 2 days later and told myself it would be someone else's problem. I blocked the restaurant's number. I unfollowed the community page. I tried to forget. 2 months after I moved inland, I walked past a newsstand and saw Chef Elena on a magazine cover. The headline said, "The Ritual of Excellence." I bought the issue and read the profile standing on the sidewalk. It was all about her discipline and sourcing, and a special late-night tasting that had captured the imagination of her regulars. The writer said the midnight menu asks something of you. I threw the magazine away and kept walking. Every once in a while, I wake around 12:03 a.m. and think I smell stock simmering in ocean air. If I listen long enough, I can hear the 3-note hum Chef made at the sink. I can feel a clean envelope between my fingers, heavy and stiff and quietly labeled. I picture a small bowl, a tilt of the wrist, a few dark flakes becoming part of a sauce that coats the back of a spoon and disappears into someone who asked for something and got it. I still cook for work, but I don't plate late-night specials anymore. If someone asks for a secret menu, I tell them we close at 10. If someone invites me somewhere at midnight, I say I'm busy. I keep a small jar of kosher salt at home, and nothing fancier. When I season, I do it where I can see my hands. I don't know what the envelopes held. Hair, fabric, ash, maybe nothing. I don't know if the diners who vanished chose it, or if the choice was made for them, or if it was all accidents and grief, and my brain stacking events into a tower. I only know what I saw from the line, and what I can't unsee when I close my eyes. Last week, I got a postcard with no return address. On the front was a photo of a rocky coastline, maybe ours, maybe somewhere else. On the back, in neat handwriting that could have been anyone's, it said, You are always welcome after midnight. There was no name, no number. Just a time and an invitation to a thing I hadn't agreed to be part of. I put the card in a drawer. That night, I woke up to the smell of the ocean, though my windows were shut. I stood in my kitchen with the lights off and waited to see if anything would happen. Nothing did. I went back to bed and slept until morning, and the card was still in the drawer. Sometimes the worst part of a secret is how ordinary the world looks while it's happening. People eat, laugh, pay, and go home. The line cleans down. The walk-in hums. A cook locks the back door and listens for the click. On the way out, he picks up a paper bag with his name on it and doesn't look inside until he's far away. When something hard touches his teeth, he tells himself it was a seed and keeps driving. He doesn't pull over. He doesn't go back. If you ever find yourself in Gray Harbor and someone offers you a menu after midnight, ask yourself what you want and what you'll pay. Then say no, or say yes. The kitchen won't tell you the difference. The plate will be hot, the sauce will be perfect, and the ocean will be at your back, waiting like it always does.